The wedding bells were ringing in Red Hollow, until Cassidy Lane kicked open the church doors, aimed her revolver, and said, "He was mine first." The desert wind howled a mournful tune, but inside the small, whitewashed church, only wedding bells were supposed to ring. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, illuminating rows of neatly dressed townsfolk. The air was thick with anticipation as Henry, the groom, stood nervously at the altar awaiting his bride, Beatrice. Suddenly, the double doors burst open with a thunderous crash. Every head swiveled toward the entrance, where a figure stood silhouetted against the harsh sunlight. It was Cassidy Lane, a woman whose reputation preceded her like a dust devil. Her eyes, sharp and unwavering, scanned the room, settling on Henry with a predatory gleam. Cassidy wore a duster coat that danced around her boots, and twin revolvers glinted at her hips. She was a whirlwind of defiance, a storm in a silk scarf. A collective gasp swept through the church as she strode confidently down the aisle, her spurs clicking against the wooden floor. "I object," she announced, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "Henry's marrying the wrong woman." All eyes were on Cassidy. She was magnetic, drawing everyone into her chaotic orbit. A low murmur rippled through the crowd, a mix of fear and morbid curiosity. Beatrice, the bride, stood frozen, her face a mask of disbelief. Henry's jaw dropped, his carefully rehearsed vows forgotten. Cassidy raised a pistol and fired a shot into the ceiling. Plaster rained down and the crowd screamed. "Henry's mine," she declared, her voice ringing with a dangerous mix of possessiveness and desperation. "And I always get what I want." The echo of the gunshot still hung in the air, mingling with the scent of gunpowder and lilies. Henry, finally snapping out of his daze, stammered, "Cassidy, what are you doing here?" His eyes darted nervously between Cassidy and Beatrice, who now stood rigid, a statue of bridal fury. Cassidy ignored Beatrice's icy glare and fixed her gaze on Henry. "I'm here to collect what's mine, Henry. You made a promise." Her voice, though laced with steel, held a hint of vulnerability. A flicker of something regret crossed her face, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a hardened resolve. "You can't just waltz in here and ruin my wedding," Henry protested, his voice rising in pitch. "I've moved on, Cassidy. You should too." "Moved on?" Cassidy laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "You call this moving on, Henry, marrying the daughter of the man who profited most from your little indiscretion." She gestured dismissively towards Beatrice. "This isn't moving on, Henry. This is burying yourself alive." Cassidy's eyes narrowed, her gaze hardening. "You and I had a deal, remember? A life we were supposed to build together, a life you stole from me." She took another step closer, her presence dominating the space. "You may have forgotten, Henry, but I haven't, and I always settle my debts." The church doors creaked open as three men, burly and armed, strode inside. "It looks like Beatrice's family wants to settle some debts of their own." The three men advanced, their faces grim, their hands hovering over their holstered pistols. "This wedding's going ahead as planned," the largest of the men, a brute with a scarred face, growled. "You're not welcome here, Cassidy." Cassidy's lips curled into a sardonic smile. "Is that so, Earl? I seem to recall a time when I was the bride-to-be. Funny how quickly things change, isn't it, Henry?" Henry blanched, shrinking further into his ill-fitting suit. "Cassidy, please," he whispered, "don't do this." Cassidy ignored him. With a speed that belied her elegant appearance, she drew both revolvers. The reports cracked through the church, deafening and immediate. Earl and his two companions barely had time to react. One clutched his shoulder, howling in pain. Another stumbled backward, clutching his chest. The third never even got his gun out of its holster. He crumpled to the floor, lifeless. The congregation erupted in screams, scrambling for cover beneath pews and behind pillars. Beatrice shrieked, her bridal gown now splattered with blood. Henry stood frozen, his eyes wide with terror and a strange flicker of admiration. Cassidy surveyed the scene, her expression cool and detached. "Anyone else have a problem with me taking what's mine?" she asked, her voice dangerously soft. Silence descended once more, broken only by the whimpering of the wounded. "Good," she said, holstering one of her revolvers. "Now, Henry, let's go." Henry, still trembling, allowed himself to be led by Cassidy out of the bloodied church. The screams and sobs of the wedding guests faded behind them as they emerged into the blinding sunlight. Two horses were waiting, saddled and ready, their reins tied to the hitching post. One was a sleek black stallion, the other a sturdy brown mare with a saddlebag slung across its back. "Get on," Cassidy commanded, her voice leaving no room for argument. Henry hesitated, glancing back at the church at the shattered remnants of his carefully constructed life. But the sight of Beatrice's enraged face peering out from the doorway spurred him into action. He scrambled onto the mare, his movements clumsy and ungraceful. Cassidy mounted the stallion with effortless ease, her posture radiating confidence and control. She grabbed the reins of Henry's horse and kicked her stallion into a gallop, leading them away from the town and towards the vast, open plains. As they rode, the wind whipped through Cassidy's hair, carrying with it the dust and debris of the chaotic scene they had left behind. She glanced back, ensuring they weren't being followed, and then turned her attention to Henry. "Hold on tight," she said, her voice barely audible above the pounding hooves. "This is going to be a long ride." Henry gripped the reins tightly, his knuckles white. He knew with a chilling certainty that his life would never be the same again. He was now completely at Cassidy's mercy, hurtling towards an uncertain future with a woman he both feared and perhaps still loved. The stolen cash in the saddlebag bounced, a constant reminder of the trouble they were in. The sun beat down mercilessly as they rode, the vast expanse of the plains stretching before them like an endless ocean of grass. The air was thick with the scent of sagebrush and dust, and the only sound was the rhythmic pounding of the horses' hooves. After several hours, Cassidy finally slowed their pace, pulling the stallion to a halt near a small, rocky outcrop. Henry, stiff and sore, gratefully dismounted, his legs wobbling beneath him. "We need to rest the horses," Cassidy said, her gaze scanning the horizon. "And we need to talk." She dismounted gracefully, her movements fluid and economical. She untied the saddlebag from Henry's horse and tossed it to the ground. "There's enough water and jerky in there to last us a couple of days. We'll need to find a town soon, though." Henry stared at the saddlebag, his mind racing. "Where are we going, Cassidy? What's the plan?" Cassidy's expression hardened. "The plan is simple, Henry. We're going to disappear, and we're going to make sure no one ever finds us." She paused, her eyes narrowing. "But first, you're going to tell me everything about why you betrayed me." She leaned against the rocky outcrop, her arms crossed, her gaze unwavering. "Because I deserve an explanation, Henry. After everything we went through, after everything we planned, you left me to die, and now I want to know why." The sun glinted off the metal of her holstered revolver, a silent reminder of the price of betrayal. The sun seemed to dim, the present fading as Cassidy's mind plunged into the past. Flashback. Dust devils danced across the parched landscape as Cassidy and Henry, younger and more carefree, emerged from the First National Bank of Redemption, a bulging sack slung between them. They were a team the best in the West. Cassidy with her sharp eyes and even sharper aim, and Henry with his smooth talk and talent for planning. "That was almost too easy," Henry chuckled, adjusting the sack on his shoulder. "Don't get cocky," Cassidy warned, her hand resting on the butt of her revolver. "We're not out of the woods yet." They rode hard for hours, finally reaching a prearranged rendezvous point, a dilapidated shack hidden deep within a canyon. As they dismounted, Henry suddenly turned on Cassidy, a glint of greed in his eyes. "Sorry, Cassidy," he said, his voice devoid of emotion, "but this is where we part ways." Before she could react, he struck her across the head with the butt of his own pistol. Cassidy crumpled to the ground, the world spinning into darkness. When she awoke, she was alone, the loot gone, and Henry nowhere to be found. The desert sun was a burning brand on her skin, and the vultures circled overhead. It was a miracle she survived. End flashback. Cassidy blinked, the harsh reality of the present snapping back into focus. The memory was a burning ember in her heart, fueling her anger and her determination. "Well, Henry," she pressed, her voice tight with suppressed rage, "I'm waiting." Before Henry could utter a single word, a distant rumble broke the silence. Cassidy's head snapped up, her eyes scanning the horizon once more. A cloud of dust was approaching rapidly, growing larger with each passing second. "Company," she said, her voice low and urgent, "and not the friendly kind." Henry scrambled to his feet, fear etched on his face. "Bounty hunters." Cassidy nodded grimly. "Beatrice's daddy doesn't strike me as the forgiving type. He'll want his daughter back, and he'll definitely want that money. Leading the pack was a figure known only as Silas. A man of few words and even fewer scruples, Silas was a legend among bounty hunters. He was relentless, resourceful, and possessed an uncanny ability to track his prey across even the most unforgiving terrain. His face was weathered and scarred, his eyes cold and calculating. He was a predator, and Cassidy and Henry were now his quarry. Silas rode a powerful, gray Mustang, its muscles rippling beneath its coat. He carried a Winchester rifle across his lap and a Colt Peacemaker on his hip. He was a walking arsenal, a force to be reckoned with. "We need to move," Cassidy said, grabbing the reins of her stallion. "Now." She glanced at Henry, her expression grim. "Can you ride?" Henry swallowed hard, his fear momentarily overshadowed by a surge of adrenaline. "I can try." Cassidy didn't wait for a further response. She swung onto her horse and kicked it into a gallop, once again leading Henry towards the unknown. The chase was on. As they rode, Cassidy pushed her stallion to its limits, putting as much distance as possible between them and their pursuers. Henry, struggling to keep up, finally managed to speak. "Cassidy," he gasped, "why are they so determined to get me back? I thought Beatrice and I." Cassidy cut him off with a mirthless laugh. "You really don't know, do you, Henry? You're marrying into the Caldwells. Have you never wondered why your pa always spat on the ground whenever their name was mentioned?" Henry frowned. "Something about a land dispute, I think." "A land dispute that turned into a decades-long feud," Cassidy corrected. "The Caldwells and the McCoys, that's you, by the way, have been at each other's throats for generations. This wedding, it wasn't about love, Henry. It was about ending the bloodshed. Your families thought marrying you two off was a way to finally bury the hatchet." Henry's eyes widened in disbelief. But Beatrice acted like she actually cared about me." "Maybe she did," Cassidy said, her voice softening slightly. "Or maybe she was just playing her part. Either way, you've just thrown a wrench into a very delicate situation. Now both families are going to be out for blood, your blood." She paused, glancing back at the approaching dust cloud. "And Silas, he doesn't care about family feuds, he just cares about the money. And trust me, Henry, the Caldwells are paying him well." The situation had become even more complicated, turning a simple chase into a powder keg of family rivalries and personal vendettas. Desperation etched on his face, Henry blurted out, "The money, Cassidy. It wasn't Beatrice's family's, it was mine. Well, it was meant for us." Cassidy reined in her stallion, her eyes narrowing in disbelief. "What are you talking about?" "Before the wedding," Henry confessed, his voice trembling, "I found out Beatrice's father was hiding a stash of cash. Money he'd been skimming from the town's coffers for years. I knew if I married her, I'd never see a cent of it, so I took it. I was going to leave her at the altar, find you, and we'd run away together just like we always planned." He hung his head, shame washing over him. "I was going to make things right, Cassidy, I swear. That's why I married her. At the last minute I was too scared, but then I planned to leave with you as I stole the money for us. Please believe me." He looked up at her, his eyes pleading. "I know I messed up, Cassidy, I know I hurt you, but I never stopped loving you. I thought you were dead, so I agreed to the marriage because everyone thought I was dead too. I never did it for myself." Tears welled up in his eyes. "Please, Cassidy, forgive me, give me another chance. Let's take the money and start over. We can be happy, I know it. I never stopped hoping that one day we could be together again." He reached out to her, his hand trembling. "Please, Cassidy." The sound of approaching horses grew louder, a stark reminder of their dwindling time. Cassidy stared at Henry, her expression unreadable. A whirlwind of emotions battled within her: anger, betrayal, confusion, and, dare she admit it, a flicker of hope. Could she really believe him? Could she forgive him for what he had done? "You expect me to just forget, Henry," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Forget that you left me to die, forget that you stole everything we had planned." "I know, Cassidy, I know," Henry pleaded, taking a step closer. "But I've changed. I'm not that person anymore. Please, give me a chance to prove it to you." The sound of approaching hooves grew louder, closer. Silas and his men were closing in. Cassidy knew she had to make a decision, and fast. "If I didn't trust you, Henry, I would have let you die back there in that church. What do you expect to happen if you did not tell me that you did what you did?" She reached for Henry's chin. "I'm trusting you." The sun began to set. "Let's go." She could leave him there to face the wrath of the Caldwells and the cold justice of Silas. It would be easy, he deserved it, but something inside her, something she couldn't quite explain, wouldn't let her do it. But Silas could be tricky to lose. Cassidy grabbed the reins of Henry's horse. "Get on," she said, her voice firm. "We're getting out of here." But it was a promise. He mounted his horse and without any hesitation followed her to the plains. Henry had to tell everything about it. This was the last chance for Henry and also for Cassidy. If not, she would burn everything down without any mercy. "I have to know why, Henry. Why did you take all that time to tell me you planned all of this?" Cassidy looked serious, waiting for an answer. Was he really going to confess? The setting sun cast long shadows across the plains as Cassidy and Henry rode, their horses laboring. They reached a narrow canyon, a natural bottleneck that offered a sliver of protection. Cassidy knew it was a trap, but it was the only option. Silas and his men were closing in fast, and they needed to make a stand. "This is it," Cassidy said, dismounting quickly. "We make our stand here." Henry, his face pale with fear, dismounted as well. "What do we do?" "We fight," Cassidy said, her eyes hardening, "and we fight to win." She positioned Henry behind a large boulder, offering him what little cover it provided. "Stay here," she ordered, "and keep your head down." Cassidy took cover behind another boulder, her revolvers drawn and ready. She could hear the approaching thunder of hooves, the snorting of horses, the low murmur of voices. Silas and his men were almost upon them. Silas emerged from the canyon entrance, his gray Mustang leading the way. He surveyed the scene, his cold eyes scanning the rocks. "Cassidy Lane," he called out, his voice flat and emotionless. "It's over. There's nowhere left to run." Cassidy didn't respond. She waited, her breathing slow and steady, her finger resting lightly on the trigger. She knew Silas was a formidable opponent, but she was determined to protect Henry and herself at all costs. "I don't want any unnecessary bloodshed," Silas continued. "Just hand over Henry and the money, and I'll let you go." Cassidy laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that echoed through the canyon. "You think I'm just going to hand him over to you, Silas? You've got another thing coming." She said, "I'm not alone and I trust him." The sun went down and everything went dark. "Now I will show you what I'm capable of." The standoff began. Before Silas could respond, a new voice pierced the darkness. "Don't be so sure, Silas." Everyone turned to see Beatrice Caldwell standing at the canyon entrance, a shotgun clutched in her hands. Her wedding dress was torn and stained, her face streaked with dirt and fury. She was no longer the docile bride, she was a woman consumed by vengeance. "That money is rightfully mine," she spat, her eyes blazing with hatred. "And Henry will pay for what he's done to me." Silas chuckled, a cold, humorless sound. "Looks like things just got a little more complicated." The standoff had now become a three-way conflict. Cassidy, Henry, Silas and his men, and Beatrice, all vying for control of the money and revenge on each other. The tension in the canyon was thick enough to cut with a knife. Cassidy knew that the situation had just turned from bad to worse. With Beatrice's sudden appearance, the odds were now stacked even higher against them. She had to think fast, and she had to act decisively. "Henry," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "get ready to run. When I give the signal, you run as fast as you can. Don't look back." Henry, his eyes wide with terror, nodded silently. He knew that this was their only chance. Beatrice raised her shotgun, aiming it directly at Henry. "This is for humiliating me in front of everyone," she screamed. The chaos was about to begin. Cassidy knew they had only one chance to make it out alive. She looked at Beatrice and asked, "Why didn't you run away before? Do you like being humiliated?" That was her move. Beatrice ignored Cassidy's question, her focus solely on Henry. "You think you're so clever, Henry, stealing from my father?" She spat on the ground, her eyes narrowed. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into." Then she turned her gaze to Cassidy, a cruel smile twisting her lips. "Oh, and Cassidy, you might want to know where that money really came from." Cassidy frowned, sensing another twist in the already tangled web. "What are you talking about?" "That money," Beatrice said, her voice dripping with venom, "was stolen from your family, Cassidy, years ago. My father took it from your pa, a debt unpaid, and Henry knew all along." Cassidy felt a surge of disbelief, followed by a burning rage. "That's not true," she said, her voice shaking. Beatrice laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. "Oh, it's true, Cassidy. Ask Henry. He knew the whole time. That's why he was so eager to marry me, why he suddenly had a change of heart at the altar, why he took the money. He thought he could play us all. But he was wrong." Cassidy turned to Henry, her eyes searching his face for answers. "Is it true, Henry? Did you know?" Henry's face was pale, his eyes filled with fear and remorse. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His silence was all the confirmation Cassidy needed. Betrayal washed over her, a cold wave that threatened to drown her. She had trusted him, given him a second chance, and he had betrayed her again. This time the betrayal cut even deeper. "You lying bastard," she spat, her hand instinctively reaching for her revolver. She knew who to shoot. It wasn't Sela's. "Henry, you have a lot of explaining to do," Beatrice yelled. Canyon fell silent, the only sound the crackling of a nearby campfire. Cassidy stood frozen, her mind reeling from Beatrice's revelation. The stolen money, the betrayal, the family feud, it all crashed down on her like a tidal wave. She looked at Henry, his face etched with guilt and fear. Could she ever forgive him? Could she ever trust him again? The answer, she knew, was no. He had lied to her, manipulated her, and used her for his own selfish gain. But the money was different. It was her family's legacy, stolen from them years ago. It was a chance to reclaim what was rightfully theirs, to rebuild what had been lost. She could take the money, leave Henry and Beatrice to their fate, and disappear into the sunset. It was the smart thing to do, the logical thing to do, but something inside her, something wild and unpredictable, craved something more. She looked at Beatrice, her face twisted with hatred and rage. She looked at Sela's, his eyes cold and calculating. She looked at Henry, his face pleading for forgiveness. "Enough," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a whip. "This ends now." She made a decision that would change everything. "Henry," she said, her voice firm, "take the money and run, get as far away from here as you can, start a new life, and don't ever look back." He looked at her bewildered. "But Cassidy—" "Just go, Henry," she said, her eyes hardening. "This isn't your fight anymore." Henry took a deep breath. "What are you going to do?" "I am going to get what my family deserves," she answered. "She has made her choice. She will make them pay." Henry hesitated for a moment, then grabbed the saddlebag containing the money and mounted his horse. He looked at Cassidy one last time, his eyes filled with regret, before turning his horse and riding away, disappearing into the darkness. Cassidy turned her attention back to Beatrice and Sela's. "Now," she said, her voice cold and steely, "let's settle this." Beatrice raised her shotgun, her finger tightening on the trigger. "You think you're so tough, Cassidy. You think you can just waltz in here and take what's mine." "Yours," Cassidy laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "This was never yours, Beatrice, and neither was Henry." Sela stepped forward, his eyes never leaving Cassidy. "This doesn't have to end this way, Cassidy. Just hand over the money, and I'll let you walk away." "Walk away with nothing," Cassidy retorted. "I don't think so, Sela's. I'm taking what's mine, and I'm not leaving here without it." The air crackled with tension as the three women faced each other, each determined to get what they wanted. A shot rang out, piercing the silence, and the final, explosive confrontation began. Sela's men opened fire, and the canyon erupted in a hail of bullets. Cassidy, with her lightning-fast reflexes and deadly accuracy, returned fire, taking down several of Sela's men. Beatrice, fueled by rage and desperation, joined the fray, firing her shotgun wildly at anything that moved. Cassidy fought with a ferocity born of years of hardship and betrayal. She was a force to be reckoned with, a whirlwind of bullets and fury. This was it. This was the moment of truth. Would she get what she wanted, or would she burn everything down trying? Only time would tell. The gunfight raged on, the canyon filled with the deafening roar of gunfire and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Cassidy, with her years of experience as an outlaw, moved with a grace and precision that belied the chaos around her. She dodged bullets, took cover behind rocks, and returned fire with deadly accuracy. Sela's, a formidable opponent in his own right, proved to be a worthy adversary. He was quick, cunning, and ruthless, and he pushed Cassidy to her limits. Beatrice, fueled by her burning desire for revenge, fought with a reckless abandon that made her a dangerous wild card. She fired her shotgun indiscriminately, hitting friend and foe alike. In the end, it was Cassidy's skill and determination that tipped the scales. With a well-aimed shot, she disarmed Beatrice, leaving her vulnerable and defenseless. Then she turned her attention to Sila's. The two faced each other, their eyes locked in a deadly stare. The silence was broken only by the sound of their heavy breathing. Cassidy fired, and Sila's fell to the ground, defeated. The remaining bounty hunters, seeing their leader fall, scattered and fled, leaving Cassidy and Beatrice alone in the bloodied canyon. Cassidy approached Beatrice, her revolver still smoking. "It's over, Beatrice," she said, her voice cold and emotionless. Beatrice looked up at Cassidy, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resentment. "What are you going to do?" Cassidy hesitated for a moment, then lowered her revolver. "I'm not going to kill you, Beatrice," she said, "but I'm not going to let you get away with what you've done either." Cassidy turned and walked away, leaving Beatrice alone in the canyon. She mounted her stallion and rode off into the sunrise, leaving behind the chaos and betrayal and reclaiming what was hers. She looked ahead and saw Henry on the horizon. She smiled and went to him. He was waiting for her. They both laughed and said, "This is our future." They rode off together in the sunset.